You're literally fine.
Careful, careful!
What was that? Gosh, this is annoying. Go. Repo is the latest flavor of the month multiplayer horror game to capture the hearts and minds of Steam accounts everywhere. It's a game that's built to scratch the same itch as games like Lethal Company or Content Warning, being a horror game that encourages co-op gameplay with wacky and silly antics between friends. However, unlike those other two games, I was actually convinced to play Repo with my friends. In the past, games like Lethal Company, for one reason or another, just haven't caught my interest at all. The main draw to these kinds of games is the aforementioned antics that you can get up to in multiplayer, but those same antics are things that I could experience in a bunch of other games that I was already familiar with. As such, I never really saw the appeal in this weird subgenre of horror game, until Repo convinced me otherwise. And all it took was one look at the title screen. If you know me at all, you know I'm a sucker for good graphic design. I've already made 3 videos on this channel going over what makes having a good visual aesthetic so important. There are games that I know are great, some of the best out there, that I simply can't play and enjoy because they fall short in the UI department. It matters that much to me. So when I booted up Repo for the first time, I immediately recognized that this was something different. The lo-fi grainy look combined with the fisheye aesthetic applied to the text immediately gave a sense of antiquity, as if the technology the game was built on was ancient. However, unlike other games in the same genre, it didn't have to sacrifice its readability or style in order to maintain that aesthetic. It's similar to games like Kingdom Hearts, where the UI manages to strike a balance of both being stylish, readable, and incredibly snappy and to the point. No part of Repo's look is confusing, and the view of a rustic vehicle driving on a rocky road gives you just enough to understand what you're getting into without knowing the full scale of your mission and what lies beyond. This is what immediately got me hooked, because I knew that if the developers cared enough to make a UI that looked this good, then they definitely cared enough to make a great game to match. Of course, I wasn't disappointed. The head is not out of this room that we're all in.
No, yeah,
Oh.
Good luck if you don't die.
The thing about good horror games is that they live and die off of immersion. Every aspect of the game has to be meticulously designed so the player can feel like they're part of the world the game takes place in. Titles like the old Resident Evil games accomplish this through suboptimal control schemes, making the player feel powerless and feeble compared to enemy threats. Whereas games like Diegetic Literature Club acknowledge the meta and break the fourth wall as their way of bridging the gap between player and game. In Repo, the horror of the game lives and dies by the game's careful curation of what the player does and doesn't know, an aspect best exemplified by the game's amazing user interface. A UI's purpose is to give information to the player, but Repo doesn't want its players to know a lot about what's going on. By design, much of the game's UI is cryptic and not immediately understandable. The most obvious example is Taxman, the titular mascot of Repo. Nothing is explicitly made clear about Taxman, but it's evident that he's representative of the entity that's hired you and your comrades to go into these haunted locations. Whenever this company's technology is found in-game, such as in the truck, the shop, or the extractor, the screens all use not words, but emojis to communicate ideas to the player. Sometimes these pictoglyphs are easily understandable, but other times they're incredibly weird and abstract. This way of communication makes the player feel just that more isolated and dehumanized, as your employer doesn't respect you enough to dignify you with even the most basic of human language. Furthermore, it adds to that aforementioned lack of information. The emoji language forces the players to largely guesstimate much of what they're supposed to be doing, why they're doing it, and who they're doing it for. Moving away from Taxman and his company's technology, let's look at the UI that's present while the game is actually being played. All of the text for the UI from the player's perspective is given this weird glitch effect, created by overlaying different colors of text over top of each other, as well as a reflective blur on the outer edges of the text. The aforementioned fisheye effect is also present, causing the text to wrap weirdly around the edges of the screen. I believe this is an intentional attempt to make the UI appear diegetic. Unlike games like Deep Rock Galactic, where the UI isn't meant to be relevant to the characters in the game itself, all of these effects applied to Repo's text seem to indicate that the UI isn't just what the player sees, but what the characters, being robots, see in-game. This greatly helps to immerse the player, and get them intertwined with the character they're playing so that they feel scared when the character would feel scared. This is something that games like Metroid Prime and the aforementioned Lethal Company do really well, and largely benefits the horror and immersion the devs are going for in Repo. It's also worth noting that the UI reacts to things that happen in the world. When a player is hurt or hit by something, the UI will glitch out, as well as making the screen red and staticky. Speaking from experience, this effect has made me miss key pieces of information, since the unreadable, messy text on the outskirts of the screen has caused me to get tunnel vision and focus only on the immediate threat. It's just another way that the horror of Repo is emphasized by the UI and the player's reliance on it. When a player always has access to, say, their health, and that's suddenly taken away from them at a present moment, even if only for a second, it'll often cause the player to panic and freak out, likely leading to even more fear. This is made even more true by the in-game map. Typically, a good map is one that shows information in a quick and readable manner. There's few things more frustrating than a map in a video game that gives you little to no actual information, forcing you to figure things out on your own. However, in Repo, the game doesn't want you to feel comfortable, and the map is reflective of that. Similar to the on-screen HUD we talked about earlier, the map in Repo is diegetic, showing up on screen as the player pulls out a physical object to look at. It also takes up the entire screen, and darkens much of the background due to how bright the light is. Similar to the screen glitching effect mentioned earlier, this causes the player to get tunnel vision, focusing only on their map and likely missing key pieces of outside info that may be hidden behind their handy device. The map itself only shows very specific and deliberate pieces of information. As you might expect, the layout of the rooms and the contents of each room are completely randomized in Repo, so the map doesn't show you what each room looks like until the player physically enters it. It also doesn't show you where enemies are, unlike more conventional maps in video games, which has caught me off guard on more than a few occasions.
Hold on, I need to check this.
They'll never see us if I pull out my bright green map. Oh, not to mention, the actual screen of the map itself is so green, bright, and pixelated that it can be hard to make out anything, especially in high-stress situations. All of these things, in a normal game, would make the map horrible and unfun to use. It doesn't give nearly enough information to be consistently helpful, it takes up your entire screen, and it isn't very readable at a glance for most people. In a typical video game environment, this map would be awful, but in Repo, it's perfect. The devs don't want you to look at the map and feel comfortable and safe. They want you to feel out of your depth and aimless, and the map absolutely reinforces that feeling. It gives just enough information to be situationally helpful, but not enough information to make the player feel secure with their circumstances. But what about when the game is on pause? When the game isn't attempting to immerse the player in its world, but just needs to give them important info while they're spectating their team or waiting for a game to start. In these situations, the game no longer wants to scare the player, replacing the horror with Repo's other biggest strength, its charm. These characters, known as semibots, and their weird, wacky antics, are the ideal contrast that allows Repo to be both scary and funny all at the same time. And this balance is demonstrated in the UI as well as the gameplay. During multiplayer, either while waiting for a game to start or while spectating teammates during a mission, the game switches to a non-diegetic UI. In these moments of brevity, the game represents the player characters through these little icons that follow your cursor with their eyes and open their mouths when the player talks, just like they do in-game. It was a genuine aha moment for me when I first saw it. It suddenly clicked for me why I was able to enjoy Repo so much when other games in the same genre didn't catch my interest. It isn't afraid to let the player breathe, to embrace the silliness that's innate to the situation these little guys have been thrust into. There's few moments funnier than watching your team attempt to lift a heavy object only to drop it over and over again and yell at each other. But those moments are only as funny as they are because of the way they contrast the fear that's present in the rest of the game. And this works vice versa too. Some of my best moments playing Repo come when me and my friends are goofing off, only to suddenly come face to face with a monster that wipes out half the team almost instantly.
Someone better ping grab the other end.
I have.
Too many cooks. Get off the end, Emma. Thank you. I have a strength upgrade. Just play it cool. Go in the...
Scarecrow.
Guys.
That sudden shift in tone is what makes this game so engaging and fun to play, and it's reflected by the gameplay as well as the UI. Repo's user interface is a series of small touches that all come together to make a big impact on the game's aesthetic. Without the care and attention the developer put into the UI, Repo wouldn't be nearly as interesting or scary to play. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.